What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Mist podcast. I'm your host, Arrow Mist here. I have thought very thoroughly about what it is that people could practice every day of their life that is extremely simple, very effective, and continues to grow your consciousness by any means. And the only thing I ever really come back to fully is like mindfulness and practicing mindfulness. Now, I would also call this practicing the discipline of the spirit to the existing self. As in, like, if you want something to be different, especially from like a mindful standpoint and growing the spirit's voice, which essentially is what mindfulness is in a different layman's term, is you have to then let it speak, listen to it, and follow through. Because if you don't, then, well, you're not really being mindful. For instance, if you notice that in your head that you exist in different places very frequently, and that could be anywhere deep in your past, maybe sometimes even in a future that doesn't exist. No matter what you're doing, if you can't call yourself out of those and just stop thinking about them, then that's a mindful practice for you to start with. Is calling yourself back. Hey, I don't got to think about that right now. Hey, I don't need to be in there right now. Hey, I don't got to do this. Hey, I don't got to do that. Like, letting yourself have a stopping point. If you don't create or dictate a stopping point, then you'll live in a continuous cycle loop, no matter what it is. And sometimes we don't realize that we live in the loops around us regardless of what happens, but that's kind of just how it is there's always going to be a loop around you. There's always loops going on. And so I think it's very imperative that we understand exactly what those loops are and, you know, if there's even anything that we can do about it. And one of the ways that we could do this is just practicing our mindfulness day in and day out. Practice where you put your time, your focus, and where you put your attention. Because regardless of what you do, no matter where you're being mindful at, where your mind is at, is where you're at, right? And that's why mindfulness is a consistent practice, because sometimes thoughts can happen and a ramaging of thoughts can continue to prolong wherever your mind might be at. But one thing that you can do away from that is, well, make the choice to begin to do something completely different. And sometimes that's a disciplined stopping point. Sometimes that's like, you know, coming back to your own senses and being like, yo, I don't have to be doing that kind of shit. I don't have to be doing that. You don't have to be something. And I think that's kind of the whole mindfulness point is like, if you're not in this progressional point with your own consciousness of like, I'm searching for the how, but I just don't have the how, then this would be the how. Now, you could practice mindfulness in more excruciating ways, for instance, like meditating. But whenever you do something like that, you're having to specify so much deeper, like with yourself, what you're trying to achieve. And I feel like this right here, as a mindfulness practice and practicing mindfulness by any degree, is something that you can do anywhere that you are. Because the mind is going to consistently create thought, and thoughts will happen. Emotions can happen from those thoughts, and experience can happen from those thoughts and those feelings, and it can just be a very continuous motion of things happening, and it can feel like it's completely out of your control with no instance of like, well, what do I do? Like I'm right, trying to figure it out. And if you're in that stage of figuring it out, the best thing you can do is remember that like you are the power, you are the stamp, you are the imposal of energy, and energy will flow until you decide to do something different with it. So mindful practice is basically just asking yourself what goal you're trying to accomplish, or being aware of something and then knowing what you're accomplishing on top of that exact same thing, right? Because, for instance, if I'm trying to accomplish, like I notice in my head that I live in other places often, and I need to stop and I need to start being mindful of where I keep my head at, you know, in a manner of understanding time, then the one thing that I'm going to be able to do is sit here and call myself out of thinking or a place that I might have been thinking at before. Just no. So the voice has to be the stamp. And anytime that you're trying to impose mindfulness, it's in a sense like guiding yourself, because you have to be the guide. And if you're not going to be the guide, someone can't directly guide you. I mean, like, if you sit down for a meditation, then someone can, but like, I think this is overall just about opening that door and giving the like how to the why. Like, okay, maybe I understand why I have my head in those places, but now I need to understand the how do I do something with that? How do I change whatever's going on if I don't like what's happening? How do I think something differently if I don't like what I'm thinking? How do I feel something differently if I don't like what I'm feeling? And being mindful of how you feel, how you think, what you think about, what you focus on, how focused you can even remain on a single task. Like, mindfulness is almost an intertwining of your own understanding to the self, because you can't impose energy if you're not making the awareness point a focal, if you're not focusing in on what you're trying to be aware of. And it is very practical to just sit and evaluate and observe yourself as you exist, because you can't do that. You can just play the observer. You can just look around, watch yourself as you do things, and then you can make a change energetically upon yourself if you choose, once you have done those exact same things. So it's important that we remember that mindfulness and everything to do with being mindful is taking things into account that at times it seems like we become very ignorantly blind to. And a good reference for this is that, like, once again, if you evaluate yourself and you look at everything you do on a day-to-day basis, that's mindfulness, right? The sense of forgetfulness, in any case, is nothing but a blockade of energy inside of the body or the mind, or both, usually both. Because there's usually a blockage in the body, and that's causing the blockage in the mind, and then that's what stops a central point of clarity of you being able to remember things that are going on throughout your existence. And that's kind of the whole point of, like, I say the whole point, that's where understanding your mindfulness begins. It's like, if I'm going to understand to start opening my consciousness, then eventually I'm going to understand what clouds my mind as well, because I know what makes me mindful and what helps me not be mindful. Which is a very, very good thing to understand, because knowing what influences you and knowing how it influences you can be very, very progressional on your own spiritual, mindful journey, whatever it is that you're on. So now, if you want to take this deeper, you could take it even deeper by meditating. But I think a part of the goal with meditating is taking it into something that you have at the forefront or in the consistent back of your mind while you're going through your day-to-day life, while you're experiencing things, while you're feeling, while you're thinking, while you're doing, while you're consciously awake, while you're not consciously awake. As long as you are subconsciously embedding in a conscious manner over time that you're keeping this mindfulness out, then you'll continue to wire yourself through on a mindful point. And I think this kind of just goes into that tale of like a self-destructive versus a creative and expressive mind. And if you truly, at the core and at the forefront, express yourself fully, then no matter what happens, you'll always be able to come back to your center of being mindful regardless, because you're aware of your existence. And you have this capacity to be aware of your existence. And not everything that exists has this prosed awareness of itself, at least that it can let you know that it's aware of itself. That's kind of the ironic thing, right? You don't know what's aware until... Anyway, anything that's water is conscious. I'll just say that. Anything that has a molecular watered structure, no matter what, it is conscious. Now, the dignified point of if it's conscious of itself is different, but regardless, us being conscious and being able to sit here and be conscious about whatever it is that we're trying to be conscious of. We have many things in front of our eyes, in front of our ears, in front of our senses to always be taking in. And, you can live a life every day where you just don't think, and you just, you don't impose this idea of mindfulness. Or, you can just think about your existence. And I guess that is a challenge for some, because it's like, well, how do I be mindful of things? But, well, because you have to realize the voice is the stamp, once again, even on your emotions. This isn't just on thoughts, it's also on emotions. And in fact, this communication should be a full through, like every piece of the mind, body, and soul in this triangle. All of them should be aligned underneath that same ideology, because that is the point of expressiveness as well in the spirit. And the spirit expressing itself is probably the most crucial part of you being mindful, because you also have to be aware of what you actually are. And if you're aware of what you actually are, especially outside of this matrix and outside of this idea of your humanistic experience, then you also begin to understand way more about what mindfulness is supposed to impose in your existence. Sometimes that's reflection. Sometimes it's not like being mindful of every single little thing every day. And you don't have to. You can, but you don't have to be on that road. But you also could be if you chose. And I think a part of this is like, we have the choice. So, you don't have to be forgetful. You can be mindful. You could sit there and begin to remind yourself of things. So I think not only are we all capable, and we all can do anything. If someone else can do it, I can do it, you can do it. Sometimes it may take other parameters for some of these things to happen, but we all have the capacity. We're all limitless beings. And so on top of that, mindfulness is a carrying weight of you putting your blocks where they have to go. You solidifying your energy. That's a part of what mindfulness is, and your expansion of consciousness is knowing where you build the fence. And it might be a fence that you could see through, but at least you're sectioning your energy to a point that is remotely productive while you're being aware of it. Because now that you're aware, you're mindful, now it's like, well, what did we do? And that is, we accomplish a goal with the saidness of our mindfulness. So if I'm saying that I'm going to be mindful about something, then understand what you're trying to accomplish with doing so, right? Am I trying to break this pattern? Am I trying to understand how I actually act and see if people's words are accurate or not? See if I actually know myself away from what everybody says that I know about myself. And that is the real understanding of who you are, and understanding yourself in the purest way you possibly can, is making your own judgment. And the mindfulness is a part of building this voice, building the integration of your spirit into your ego self, your I dignification, the I am in this part of your dimensional biosphere, as in your human part of your experience, connecting directly into your spirit experience and indulging into this interconnectability that can seem very overwhelming and very difficult to achieve. But once again, the more that you are awakening and have awoken to what is right in front of you, the more that you are capable of understanding exactly what was there in the first place. Every practice is something that takes time to establish. So I wouldn't knock yourself if you can't establish this as avidly as you want, but your intentions will always be the guidance to the energy that you impose within any realm of your own world. So continue to impose those accurately, and I'm sure anyone will see the results that they seek. This is just a part of giving you something in your toolbox that you could use if you are looking for a progressional point with your own consciousness. I'm sure many people talk about mindfulness and the things that they practice with it and how they do it and whatever else, but I think at the baseline, this part of the conversation is extremely important. So thank you guys for listening. This one's a little short. Remember, links in the description, Aeromist on every platform if you want to go check me out, see what I got going on, got some music, all that other kind of stuff. If you have any suggestions for this, throw it in my inbox. All my DMs on my platforms are open. Let me know what's up. And I'll catch y'all on the next one.